Hi. Today we are interviewing and speaking to Dr. Rhoda Smith. Dr. Smith is a social worker. She is a friend, and we're so glad to have her with us. Um, Rhoda, please go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about how you came to social work, what you do now as a social worker, and why you're passionate about this profession.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Brown, for having me here. Um, it's hard to do this interview without saying I do love me some Lori Brown, so I'm gonna go ahead and get that out of the way because as you will hear about later, Dr. Brown was one of my mentors when I came to child welfare social work. So from the beginning, I am Dr. Rhoda Smith, and I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois. But I lived in California for 35 years, and that's actually where I got my social work education, where it started. So I finished a bachelor's in psychology at Cal State Fullerton. I got my master's at the University of Southern California, go Trojans, and I got my doctorate at Loma Linda University. I have been a social worker, which now I'm referring to when I got my master's in social work from the University of Southern California since 1992. I don't know the math on that. It's maybe 30 years, something like that. So it's very interesting because I'm currently a social work professor in Springfield, Massachusetts. That's what I do now. So I'm a social worker who is an educator of students in the MSW program at Springfield, but I'm also a social work researcher, and I'm studying expectant and parenting youth in the child welfare system. So I've always been drawn to child welfare. I started initially in mental health. I was doing psychiatric social work at Patton State Hospital, and it was very interesting. I was basically doing that because when I got my master's, I went to a school where you could select a concentration. My concentration was mental health. I loved it. I was working with severely and acutely mentally ill people who had been convicted of a crime, but because of their mental illness, it was appropriate to assess and find out what were the issues needed to be able to stabilize them. So what needed to be assessed and how would we intervene to stabilize their mental health so that they could return to court and stand trial for their crimes. So clearly, being mentally ill is not a crime, but if you are mentally ill, you might perform behaviors that are criminal in nature. And so some of the people I worked with were, something as small as they were shoplifting, they were chronic shoplifters, or they attacked somebody because they heard voices in their head telling them that the people were out to get them. And sometimes people died. They might have killed someone. So in that case, and we'll get to this later, but you have to ask yourself, should we lock up a person who is not in their right mind, who hurts or kills somebody? Should we lock them up? Is the correct treatment for that jail? So that's just something you can ponder. I don't know that there's a correct answer, but we'll go the social worker way and just think about it while we are venturing down this path. So back to what I'm doing now. So I'm also on the virtual resource faculty with the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and the Casey Foundation also has a focused interest and intervention for kids who are system involved. So whether that's juvenile justice or child welfare, the Casey Foundation tries to support their well-being and transition into adulthood. I'm also serving a 3-year term right now as the board chair with the Healthy Teen Network, which is a national organization that serves agencies who address issues of sexual and reproductive health for youth and young adults. So if you were to ask me where I practice social work, I practice social work as I am being a professor in the MSW program, because I actually teach the practice classes, which I call How to Be a Social Worker, right? So it's How to Be a Social Worker 1, 2, 3, and 4. So from the beginning, how do we approach clients? How do we think about clients? What do we consider when we are assessing them? So for me, I think that requires this face-to-face interaction that none of us are allowed to have right now in person. And that's okay, because as social workers, when things like this come up, we just call these challenges. So we can always work with the challenge, right? So we get to talk about things that are happening in the world, because whatever's happening in the world, your client is going to bring it right to your office. So you better know what's going on out there, right? So I'm practicing and conducting social work as a professor. So it's my job to evaluate professional behavior, because as I like to tell my students who are getting their masters, this is not just a master's degree you're getting. You're going to be transformed into a social worker, and it is going to be painful sometimes, funny sometimes, sad sometimes. That just goes with the territory. So, because think about it, if you're a ball of clay and then we make you into a beautiful piece of art, that means we have to stretch you. We have to force you to go in a direction you would not have normally gone on your own. So as not to go down too many rabbit trails, I'm going to try to stick to my script here. When did I decide to become a social worker? I decided to become a social worker in 1989. And actually at that time, I had very little information about what social workers did. It sounded like a good runner-up for my choice that I had selected to become a medical doctor. So for many years and in my undergrad, I was going to be an OBGYN. And Lori, did you lose my picture? Doctor for many years. When I entered my undergrad at Cal State Fullerton, I had a major in psychology. I was gonna take the MCATs and get into a pre-med program at UC Irvine and all of that. And after I graduated with my bachelor's, you know, at the time, I was a single parent. And I thought, I don't want to put my kids through 8 years of medical school where, did it pause again, Lori? So, can you still hear me?
Keep going, yes.
Yeah. So I decided I wasn't going to put my kids through 8 years of medical school. I had already had them sleeping on the floor in the study rooms at Cal State Fullerton. And at the end of the journey, I wanted my kids to know me. So I thought, well, you know, I'd revisit it. Why did I want to become a doctor? I wanted to be a doctor so I could help people. So there's lots of professions where you could help people. I didn't even know how I wanted to help people. I just thought I wanted to help people. So I wanted a profession where I could do that. And so I started calling around some of my friends and asking them about the master's programs they were in. They were in counseling and human services and psychology, but none of that seemed like what I wanted to do. And they advised me, why don't you look at social work? And so I did. And I thought, this is exactly what I wanted to do. And the thing about social work is that you can do anything with an MSW degree. So it will take you anywhere. If you have a passion to work with people like the population I just described, people who have been, you know, committed to a mental health, excuse me, to a forensic setting, right? Those are not anybody's favorite people, right? So that's where we come in, right? We talk to people other people won't even think about. And not only do we talk to them, we remind them of their worth. We try to understand what their journey has been. And most of all, we try to give hope, right? We try to bring them some hope. So I decided this is exactly what I want to do. I want to be a social worker. So I went to USC to pursue my master's. And again, I knew I wanted to help people, but I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. So my program, again, had several concentrations you could look at. So I could have looked at policy advocacy, community organizing, medical, mental health, child and families. I looked at mental health and I was content on that job. I loved that job. until a friend of mine went to work for Child Protective Services. And then she called me up and said, girl, you should apply for a job over here. This job has your name written all over it. I was like, what? I don't want people, you know, kids blowing their noses on me and people ready to fight over their kids. I didn't want to do that. And so I reluctantly went. I applied for that job. I got it because, you know, once you have your master's, you can work anywhere. So I applied for that job and I got it. And that's when I met Dr. Brown. Dr. Brown was actually my, they called it induction at that time. So we'll call it like pre-service training for the job. And I sat reluctantly in that class for probably 4 or 5 weeks. And on the last day, it hit me like, these people trust you to work with children and families. And I just felt so overwhelmed with, like not just joy, but it was like a sense of responsibility. It was an honor. That day, I decided it's an honor to be in service to people. And so I wanted to become a social worker and be in service to people. So a lot of people are like, wait, what did you want to do? Because somebody's going to be ready to curse you out or fight you or whatever over their kids. But, you know, I actually loved it when people would like get in my face because I was like, ooh, I know exactly what to do. So when I had kids and they were crying, I knew, get down on their level. Like I was loving the adverse parts of the job. It's a lot of work though. But if this job is for you, I will say, and I'm not trying to sound cliche, if this job is for you, it is the best job in the world because you know that just like your life was changed when you become a social worker, you have the ability to help people change their lives. So it depends on what population you want to work with. You can work with some, you know, hospital, that would be patients. You can work with clients receiving some kind of human or social services. You can work with, you know, people who are adjudicated for crimes, or you could work with foster youth. I can't tell you how many times I cried on the job being a child welfare social worker. But what I knew was, even if I don't see this kid anymore after these 6 months I'm working with them, while I'm with them, they're gonna know that somebody cares. And I think that for a lot of kids who go into foster care, people are so busy trying to get the job done. You know, those people who call themselves social workers, but they don't have a social work degree. They don't know what we do. They don't know the oath that we have taken under the code of ethics. So they don't see the job the same way. And that's what a social work education will do for you, is it will show you how when people are just perpetrating, doing what people tell them to do, but not understanding why, then they don't bring that depth of empathy and understanding to the job that we need. Because just because I listen to my client who might have committed a crime, it doesn't mean I agree with what they did. It just means I hear you. I hear what you're saying. No, I might not agree with what you did. But the fact of the matter is, if I hear you, because a lot of people just want to be heard, that's going to make a difference in their life. So what do I love about what I do? If I haven't already told you, I love that we're able to provide a strengths-based perspective to populations that other people might despise or consider unworthy of that kind of respect and dignity. We're able to approach people who are not often shown kindness and help them see their worth and value. We're able to help families have discussions that they wouldn't have had before because they only were looking at something one way. And lastly, we get to give people hope, and that's what I love the most about the job. So what are some of the things I struggle with as a social worker? As a social worker, I struggle with administration and legislation and policies that are unfair to the populations that are underserved, marginalized, oppressed, and vulnerable. I feel that sometimes the people who are making the decisions about others are not able to exhibit empathy or have an understanding of the plight of the people they're making the policies for. So for example, I share with you that one of the populations I work with as a social work researcher are foster youth. Do people really understand what it's like for a child to be ripped out of their home, for a child to be abandoned, and now you want that child to just go along with everything that you think should happen for them, and then they don't have a voice. And then later you say, well, you're grown up, so go out there and you know, make your way in the world. But they've never made a decision for themselves. They've never heard their own voice say, this is what I would like. So if you notice, child welfare is a little friendlier now because social workers stood up and pointed this out. Hey, these kids need to be able to talk. They need to be able to practice decision making. We can't just let them transition. So it might seem like a little thing, but it's really a big thing. And I'll tell you a little thing that's sad, but good. So in child welfare, sometimes kids die. And when I first became a child welfare social worker and somebody told me kids are gonna die, I thought this was absurd. What are you talking about? Kids are gonna die. They're not gonna die under my watch. Like, we're gonna keep all the kids safe. So I had that real fairy tale kind of understanding about what social work was. But let me tell you something about when kids die. It's always sad, but then something big will change. Something will change that will help the rest of the kids. And so for me, how I made peace with that is, even though this child died so other kids could live better. So that's the way I see that. So we are working in a world that things don't always turn out the way we would like. And sometimes, I'm sure you've heard, bad things happen to good people. But as social workers, that becomes our job to make sure that those kids don't die in vain. So whatever happened, then we see this is where we need to work. This is where the intervention needs to happen, either whether that's supervision or whatever it is, we need to fix that. So the thing about child welfare, things will change, but they change by the inch. They don't change by the foot. So eventually we will have a wonderful child welfare system, but probably none of us will be alive to see that. But it's good to know that that will happen. Now, what advice would I give to you guys that are thinking about careers as professional social workers? I would advise you to be open to digging deep into yourself, because if you don't know who you are, how can you help somebody else recognize who they are? How can you support and encourage who they are being if you're not even supporting and encouraging who you are being? So I think that we need to be able to understand our own issues. And a lot of times people come to this profession because either they have experienced or seen things that they think could and should be different, but those things have left a mark on them. So there's so many people who have not gotten over their childhood. You would not believe the number. That's why the intervention with children is so important. People look at children and think they're a kid, they'll bounce back, they'll be okay, but sometimes they're not. And when they're not okay as kids, they're not okay as teenagers, they're not okay as young adults, and they're worse as adults. Maybe you've encountered some of those people. Grumpy all the time, mad at the world, seeing everything cup half full. So you have to understand your own issues, and you have to be able to be honest about, have I really resolved this, or did I just choose not to talk about it again? Because I can tell you right now, if you're really looking at resolving these things, don't get upset when you come to school and then you're crying at school, because maybe it's something about you that you never really looked at and it was buried and now it came up as a topic. So that's why we delved into this, so that when you get to the clients' houses, you're not crying first, longer, or louder than they are. Because you can cry on the job. It's not, it's not a crime. So this is a profession where you need to know who you are and be willing to continue to learn, be willing to face your own biases, because all God's children got biases. You got some too. And you need to be able to learn, be willing to learn about and understand and empathize, like walk in the shoes of another person, right? So I've never been homeless, but I can't even imagine that. as many times as I try. If I get locked out of my car, I'm gonna be upset. So I can't imagine I don't have a house to go to. So my point becomes, we need to be able to think as deeply about ourselves and each other as we can. And that's what I think will make you a successful social worker. And so that's all I have, Dr. Brown, for today. I hope that was enough.
Thank you so much, Rhoda. That was fantastic. We are so appreciative that you were able to speak to the class. I know that you have given them a lot to think about and a lot to contemplate as they look at social work being a career that they may choose. Thank you so much.